ॐ भूर्भुवः स्वः तत्सवितुर्वरेण्यं भर्गो देवस्य धीमहि धियो यो नः प्रचोदयात्। ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः। Namaskar, my dear friends. I'm going to make a very important video on Atma Vidya or Brahma Vidya or the knowledge of the self in the form of a dialogue between sage Yajnavalkya and his learned wife Maitreyi. This dialogue is very famous dialogue from Upanishad. This dialogue is from Brihadaranyaka Upanishad. This Upanishad is widely known for its philosophical statements and is ascribed to Yajnavalkya. It looks at reality as being indescribable and its nature to be infinite and consciousness bliss. Ethics revolve around the 5 yajnas or sacrifices. So I start the video. That is dialogue between Yajnavalkya and his wife Maitreyi. The self alone is to be meditated upon. Of all these, this self alone should be realized, for it is dearer than a son, etc. In the course of explanation of the above passages already introduced, the aim of knowledge and its relation to that aim have been stated in the sentence. It became all. Thus it has been mentioned that the inner self is the domain of knowledge. It consists of the ends and means of rights with 5 factors, which again depends on the division of man, manifest and unmanifest, like the trees and the seed, and is made up of name, form and action. This relative deed consists of 3 things: name, form and action. One aspect of it is in accordance with the scriptures and makes for progress leading up to the world of Hiranyagarbha, while the other aspect is not in accordance with the scriptures and causes degradation down to the level of stationary objects. All this already have been shown in the section beginning with 2 classes of Prajapati's sons, etc. In order to show how a man disgusted with this domain of ignorance can qualify himself for the knowledge of Brahma, which deals with the inner self. The entire domain of ignorance has been concluded in the first chapter, but in the second chapter, after introducing the inner self, which is the domain of the knowledge of Brahma. In the words, I will tell you about Brahma, and I will instruct you about Brahma. The Shruti has taught about that Brahma, the one without a second, devoid of all differences, by eliminating roads, in the words, not this, all material qualities summed up in the word truth, which by its very nature comprises action, its factors, and its results. As part of this knowledge of Brahma, the Shruti wishes to enjoin renunciation. Rights with 5 factors such as wife, son, and wealth constitute the domain of ignorance because they do not lead to the attainment of the self. If a thing calculated to produce a particular result is applied to bring about a different result, it frustrates its purpose. Running or walking is not the means to appease one's hunger or thirst. The sun and the rest have been prescribed in the Shruti as a means to the attainment of the world of man, of the means, and of the gods, not as means to the attainment of the self. They have been mentioned as producing those specific results, and they have not been enjoined on the knower of Brahma, being classed by the Shruti as rights with material ends in the passage. This much indeed is desire, and the knower of Brahma has already attained all desires. He cannot for that very reason have any more desires. The Shruti too says, we who have attained knower of Brahma has already attained all desires. He cannot for that very reason have any more desire. The Shruti too says, we who have attained this self, this world. But there are some who hold that even a knower of Brahma has desires. They have certainly never heard the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, nor of the distinction made by the Shruti that the desire for a son and so forth belongs to an ignorant man, and that with regard to the domain of knowledge, the statement, what shall we achieve through children, we who have attained the self, this world, and so on, is applicable. They do not also know the contradiction based on incongruity between the attainment of knowledge, which obliterates all action with its factors and results, and ignorance together with its effects. Nor have they heard Vyasa's statement on the subject. The contradiction rests on the opposite trends of the nature of rights and that of knowledge, which partake respectively of ignorance and illumination. On being asked, there are 2 Vedic injunctions: perform rites and give up rites. What is the goal of knowledge and what of rites? I wish to be enlightened on this, so please instruct me. These two, it seems, are mutually contradictory and run counter to each other. Vyasa replied thereby showing the contradiction. Men are bound by rights and freed by knowledge. Hence, sages who have known the truth never perform rites, and so on. Therefore, The knowledge of Brahma leads to the highest goal for man, not with but without the help of any auxiliary means, for otherwise there would be contradiction all around. It is to show this that renunciation of the world, which consists in giving up all means, is sought to be enjoined as a subsidiary step. For at the end of the 4th chapter, it has been asserted, this much indeed is the means of immortality, my dear, and we have also a sign for inference about this in the fact that Yajnavalkya, who was a ritualist, renounced the world. Moreover, the knowledge of Brahma as a means to immortality has been imparted to Maitreyi, who was without the means to perform rites. Also, wealth has been deprecated. If rites were means to immortality, the derogatory remarks about wealth would be out of place, since on it rites with 5-factor depend. If, however, rights are desired to be shunned, then it is proper to decry the means to them. Besides, in the state of knowledge, there is an absence of the consciousness about caste, order of life, etc., which are the qualifications for the performance of rites as we see in the passages. The Brahmana ost 1, the Kshatriya ost 1, etc. When one ceases to consider oneself a Brahman, a Kshatriya, or the like, there is certainly no room for such injunction as that this is the duty of Brahmanas or that this is the duty of Kshatriya. For there are no such persons. For a man who does not identify himself as a Brahmana, a Kshatriya, or the like, rites and their accessories, which are the effects of that consciousness, are automatically dropped because of the giving up of that consciousness. Therefore, this story is introduced with a view to enjoining injunction of this world as part of the knowledge of the self. Now the dialogue starts. Sanskrit stanzas are given, so I'll just give the translation only. First stanza. Maitreyi, my dear, said Yajnavalkya, I am going to renounce this life. Allow me to finish between you and Katyayani. The sage Valkya, addressing his wife Maitreyi, said, Maitreyi, I am going to renounce this householder's life. I intend to take up the life of renunciation, which is the next higher life. Hence, I ask your permission. The particle R is a vocative. Further, I wish to finish between you and my second wife, Katyayani, that is, put an end to the relationship that existed between you through me, your common husband, by dividing my property between you, and I will separate you through wealth and go. Second stanza says, now Katyayani replies, this Maitreyi replies, thereupon Maitreyi said, Sir, if indeed this whole earth full of wealth be mine, shall I be immortal through that? No, replied Yajnavalkya. Your life will be just like that of people who have plenty of things, but there is no hope of immortality through wealth. Thus addressed Maitreyi said, Sir, if indeed this whole earth, girdled by the ocean and full of wealth be mine, shall I be immortal through that? That is through rites such as the Agnihotra, which can be performed with the entire wealth of the earth. The particle indicate deliberation. The word katham, how, indicates disbelief, meaning never, or it may have an interrogative force, in which case it should be construed with the slightly remote word, shall I be immortal? No, replied Yajnavalkya. If the word how indicates disbelief, Yajnavalkya's word no is an approval. If it has an interrogative force, his reply means you can never be immortal, as is the life of people of means filled with materials of enjoyment, so will your life be, but there is no hope even in thought of immortality through wealth, that is, rites performed with wealth. Third stanza. Then Maitreyi said, What shall I do with that which will not make me immortal? Tell me, sir, of that alone which you know to be the only means of immortality. Thus addressed Maitreyi said in reply, If this is so, what shall I do with that wealth, which will not make me immortal? Tell me, sir, of that alone which you know to be the only means of immortality. Stanza 4. Now Yajnavalkya replies. Yajnavalkya said, My dear, you have been my beloved even before, and you say, What is after my heart? Come, take your seat. I will explain it to you. As I explain it, meditate on its meaning. When rites performed with wealth were rejected as a means to immortality, Yajnavalkya, seeing that Maitreyi concurred with his views, was pleased and said, O Maitreyi, you have been my beloved even before, and now you say what is just after my heart. Therefore, come and take your seat. I will explain to you what you desire, that knowledge of the self which confirms immortality. But as I explain it, meditate or desire to reflect steadfastly on the meaning of my words. The particle bata is suggestive of tenderness. Verse number 5. Continuing his conversation, Yajnavalkya said, It is not for the sake of the husband, my dear, that he is loved, but for one's own sake that he is loved. It is not for the sake of the wife, my dear, that she is loved, but for one's own sake that she is loved. It is not for the sake of the sons, my dear, that they are loved, but for one's own sake that they are loved. It is not for the sake of wealth, my dear, that it is loved, but for one's own sake that it is loved. It is not for the sake of the Brahma, my dear, that he is loved, but for one's own sake that he is loved. It is not for the sake of the Kshatriya, my dear, that he is loved, but for one's own sake that he is loved. It is not for the sake of the words, my dear, that they are loved, but for one's own sake that they are loved. It is not for the sake of the gods, my dear, that they are loved, but for one's own sake that they are loved. It is not for the sake of the beings, my dear, that they are loved, but for one's own sake that they are loved. It is not for the sake of all, my dear, that all is loved, but for one's own sake that it is loved. The self, my dear Maitreyi, should be realized, should be heard of, reflected on, and meditated upon. By the realization of the self, my dear, through hearing, reflection, and meditation, all this is known. With a view to teaching renunciation as a means to immortality, Yajnavalkya creates a distaste for the wife, husband, sons, etc., so that they may be given up. He said, it is not for the sake or necessity of the husband that he is loved by the wife, but it is for one's own sake that he is loved by her. The particle why indeed regards something that is well known, signifying that this is a matter of common knowledge. Similarly, it is not for the sake of the wife, etc. The rest is to be explained as before. Likewise, it is not for the sake of the sons' wealth, the Brahmana, the Kshatriya, the worlds, the gods, the beings, and all. The priority of enumeration is in the order of their closeness to us as sources of joy, for it is all the more desirable to create a distaste for them. The use of the word all is for including everything that has and has not been mentioned. Hence, it is a well-known fact that the self alone is dear and nothing else. It has already been said, this self is dearer than a son, etc. The present text serves as a detailed commentary on that. Therefore, our love for other objects is secondary, since they contribute to the pleasure of the self, and our love for the self alone is primary. Therefore, the self, my dear Maitreyi, should be realized, is worthy of realization, or should be made the object of realization. It should first be heard of from a teacher and from the scriptures, then reflected on through reasoning, and then steadfastly meditated upon. Thus only is it realized. When these means with hearing, reflection, and meditation have been gone through, when these three are combined, then only true realization of the unity of Brahma is accomplished, not otherwise by hearing alone. The different castes such as the Brahmana or the Kshatriya, the various orders of life and so on, upon which rites depend and which consist of actions, their factors and their results are objects of notions superimposed on the self by ignorance, based on false notions like that of a snake in a rope. In order to destroy these, he says, by the realization of the self, my dear, through hearing, reflection and meditation, all this is known. So I end this video here and continue the same dialogue between Yajnavalkya and his wife Maitreyi in the next videos. Thank you for watching this video. Please like, comment and share the video. Thanks a lot. Namaskar, my dear friends.